Holiday lunches are supposed to bring families together, but that day felt like stepping into a storm I didn't see coming. I arrived with a quiet hope that maybe the tension from the past year had faded, maybe the criticisms would be lighter, maybe the conversations would finally feel like family instead of survival. I wanted to believe things could be different, because no matter how far I had come in life, a small part of me still longed for the comfort only a parent's acceptance can give. But the moment I walked in, I sensed something was wrong. The room fell silent as if my presence had disrupted a perfect picture they wanted to preserve. One where I didn't fit. One where someone with my identity and history never quite belonged. And then in front of relatives, friends, and the glittering holiday table, my mother's voice sliced through the air. Calm, cold, and final. She told me I needed to leave. She said I needed to stop relying on the family. As if I hadn't built my life brick by brick on my own. As if I had ever depended on them for anything more than emotional scraps. Her words weren't just rejection. They were confirmation of a truth I'd been avoiding for years. As I stood there, absorbing the humiliation, memories from childhood rushed back in waves. The moments when they told me to hide certain parts of myself because the world wouldn't like it. The times they insisted that my darker features came from the side of the family they rarely spoke about, the side they treated like a stain they could scrub away. Growing up mixed in a household that favored one identity and denied the other left cracks that took years to fill. They pushed me harder than my siblings, claiming I had to work twice as much to be accepted. But the bitter truth was that their expectations were rooted in prejudice, not love. When I finally left home at 18, it wasn't a brave choice. It was survival. I promised myself that if I ever succeeded, it would be on my own terms, not to prove them wrong, but to reclaim the parts of me they made me feel ashamed of. And over the years I did succeed. Quietly, steadily, without applause. But despite everything I'd achieved, some part of me still wanted a seat at their table. That's why that lunch mattered. That's why her words felt like a final severing of a thread I didn't know was still holding me to them. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I simply nodded and went upstairs to pack the small bag I brought. As I moved through the hallway, relatives avoided eye contact. Some shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable but not enough to intervene. That's the thing about family. They love comfort more than truth. I placed each item in my bag, steady and slow, as the humiliation settled deeper into my bones. Outside the window, children played in the yard, laughing freely, unaware of how heavy the world can become once innocence is lost. When I came back downstairs, I noticed my little cousins watching me. Their eyes held questions. Questions they were too young to ask, but I saw concern, confusion, empathy. It reminded me of myself at their age, sensing injustice long before understanding it. And in that moment, I realized something profoundly painful. History repeats itself in families that refuse to confront their own shadows. As I stepped outside, the cold air wrapped around me like a warning and a blessing. I walked down the driveway with nothing but my bag, my dignity, and the quiet resolve that had kept me alive all these years. The truth was my mother didn't tell me to leave, because I relied on anyone. I paid my own bills. I built my own life. I didn't ask for money, support, or validation. What she resented was the strength I developed, strength that grew from the very struggles they caused. What she resented was that I outgrew the small box they tried to force me into. Deep down, they must have known that my accomplishments, my independence, my identity, and my resilience were proof that their beliefs were wrong. And some people would rather push you out than face the discomfort of their own mistakes. 3 days after that lunch, everything changed. My life took a turn so dramatic. It felt like destiny intervening after years of silence. I received a message from a major organization I had been collaborating with on a long-term community project, focused on educational and financial support for underrepresented youth. They wanted me not only to lead the project but to become the public figurehead of it. My work, years of anonymous donations, late nights, and relentless dedication, had finally been recognized on a national scale. They offered a deal so large, it was hard to comprehend. But more than money, it came with influence, reach, and a platform I had once prayed for during my darkest times. I signed the agreement with steady hands, knowing that this was bigger than me. It was an opportunity to pour into others what I never received. It was a way to break the generational patterns that suffocated so many like me. News of my appointment spread quickly. Within a week, articles were published, interviews requested, and my face appeared on platforms I once thought were unreachable. My work had gone from quiet impact to national recognition. And just like that, the same relatives who watched me leave that holiday table in silence suddenly had plenty to say. Messages poured in, hesitant, apologetic, hopeful. They pretended to check on me, pretending they cared, pretending that they hadn't watched me get thrown out without lifting a finger. Even my mother reached out, her words carefully crafted, layered with excuses she hoped I would interpret as love. But I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. Anger fades. I didn't respond because I finally understood something I had spent years trying to ignore. I didn't know them access to the life they tried to shrink. Weeks passed before I drove back near the old neighborhood, not to confront anyone but to close a chapter. I parked near the house, watching the lights flicker inside. It looked smaller than I remembered, as if time had pulled it inward. I didn't approach the door. I didn't need to. Standing there, I realized how far I had come, how much I had grown, how much I had survived. I realized that the greatest revenge is not anger, bitterness, or proving yourself. It's living a life so full, so purposeful, so entirely your own that their rejection becomes irrelevant. When I finally got back in my car, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel broken. I felt free. I whispered a quiet thank you, not to them but to myself. To the person who kept going. To the child who endured. To the adult who rebuilt. And to the version of me that finally understood that being pushed out was not a punishment. It was an invitation to rise. If you've ever been thrown away by the people meant to protect you, if you've ever been told you weren't enough because of who you are, remember this. Your worth doesn't come from who accepts you. Sometimes the family you lose is the price of the life you are meant to build. And sometimes walking out the door they closed is the first step into your own becoming.